هيدر هيدر عم الآخر هيدر.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Logic, Directory Logic. Last class we went over the concept of truth tables and propositional properties. So what we meant by that was that in the previous class before that, we went over the concept of something known as a proposition. And a proposition was something we called a signifier for an affirmation. So what does that mean? A signifier for an affirmation is to identify in words something as being true. So I know that the sky is blue. If I say the sky is blue, that in itself is a proposition. The first word, sky, and blue is linked by the statement is. Now we understand the concept of the sky, and we understand the concept of blue, and we understand the linkage between them being is. That being said, a proposition is a way of speaking that mental understanding of whether or not the sky is blue. Now, it is not necessary to say that the proposition determines your understanding and your affirmation of thoughts. Rather, you affirm thoughts in your head and then you speak them out with an affirmation, with a proposition. Now, propositions fall all under three categories: necessary, possible, or impossible. Now, necessary propositions are saying red is a color, where the concept of color falls naturally under the concept of red. So if I say red, I imply the concept of color. Possible state propositions are the car is brown, meaning that the car could be any color, and that concept can change however it needs to, and it's not necessary that brown is inherent to car. The reason for this is because brown is an accident of the quality car. Impossible statements, the third kind, are something like saying my favorite color is Tuesday. The logic of the sentence doesn't make sense because color and Tuesday are two separate concepts that have no linkages and no commonalities. So there's nothing that can link those two concepts together. So the necessary conclusion here is that for a proposition to make sense, the two concepts have to be linked and share some commonality. Now, all propositions follow the principle of non-contradiction, meaning that you can't affirm something and then deny that very same thing. So you can't say the sky is blue and it's not blue. That doesn't make any sense. Either the sky is blue or it's not. You can't say both. It doesn't make any sense. Now, one of the fundamental rules about propositions that we're going to be using a lot today is the rule of distribution. Yeah? So if I said all students wear backpacks, Sally is a student, then Sally wears a backpack. If I said all animals breathe, humans are an animal. Humans must breathe. So whenever I refer to the larger concept, I automatically distribute that proposition of truth towards all of the lower concepts. If I affirm something for the genus, it must necessarily be true for all of the species. Now, when we're discussing propositions, we can use a couple of terms, and these special terms are ways of linking and identifying the ways that propositions work together. So there are 5 categories that propositions fall under: affirmation, negation, if-then statements, and or statements. And for all of these statements, there is a possible case, a necessary case, and an impossible case. So in the event of an if-then statement, if I said if A, then B, B is necessary for the case of B. If I have B, it doesn't necessarily imply A, however. So I can say if A, then B, but I cannot say if B, then A. However, what I can say is if not B, then A, then not A. This is called the converse. Now, the and statement is a statement in which two things must necessarily both be true, or two things can be both possible in each of them. And an or statement is either one thing is true or another thing is true. So either the sky is blue or it's not blue. Now, today what we're going to go over the concept of syllogism. And a syllogism is a way of formally expressing your proof. It's a way of saying in words what you have in your head, a way of proving to get to a concept, right? So for example, a simple syllogism would be all animals breathe. A human is an animal, therefore humans breathe. That is the simplest syllogism that I could think of. But the main idea behind syllogisms is that you have two premises and you have a conclusion. Now, the first premise, Assalamualaikum. How's it going? The first premise in the syllogism must be correct, and the second premise in the syllogism must also be correct. But the important part here is that you must have a linkage between the first premise and the second premise. So in the example that I just gave, all animals breathe. A human is an animal, therefore humans breathe. The linkage between the first premise and the second premise is the word animal. So all animals breathe, humans are an animal. This links the first and the second premise. Now, the conclusion must be linked to both of those. So I said that a human must breathe because a human is an animal. And a human is connected to the second premise in the subject. Now, one of the fallacies that you'll run into for syllogisms is something known as the fallacy of the undistributed middle. So let's say I came across this syllogistic formula, and I said if I have to have a common word, then I can abuse this however I want. So let's say, for example, in a hypothetical situation, all cats are black. Some TVs are black. Therefore, some TVs are cats. That doesn't make any sense, right? Or if I said all students wear backpacks, my grandpa wears a backpack, therefore my grandpa is a student. Doesn't make any sense, right? Right, of course. Now, one of the things here is the problem with this statement. The problem with this statement that I just made. All students wear backpacks. My grandpa wears a backpack. Therefore, my grandpa is a student. So what's the problem here? So the problem here is when we go... Here's a problem. All right, the problem here is when we go to what we were discussing earlier, if-then statements. So if you could say if A, then B. But you can't similarly say if B, then A, because that doesn't make any sense. So if I said, if the lamp is broken, the room is dark. But I cannot say, if the room is dark, the lamp is broken. That doesn't logically make sense. However, if I were to say, in this case, all students wear backpacks, I'm basically saying, if a student, then it's wearing a backpack. And where I'm saying it, what I would be saying in this fallacy here is if all students wear backpacks, my grandpa wears a backpack, and therefore my grandfather is a student, what I'm saying is that if someone is wearing a backpack, they must necessarily be a student. It's reversing the order of the logic of the if-then statement there. This is known as the fallacy of affirming the consequent. Now, the way to avoid that is you have to think a little bit more categorically. So if we go back to some of the first lessons that we've been in, what we went over was the idea of genus and species and linking things in such a way that they overlap hierarchically. Now, the way we do this, Assalamualaikum, everyone. So for example, when I was talking about genus and species, if I say animal, I'm including... All right, I'll be careful. If I'm talking about animal, I'm talking about vertebrates and invertebrates. Now, if I said a quality for a vertebrate, it has to apply to everything that is below it. Now, if I say a quality that applies to animal, it has to apply to everything that applies to vertebrates and invertebrates. However, I can't say something for a quality of an invertebrate and necessarily apply it to the quality of a vertebrate. That doesn't make any sense. So in this case, when we're having this fallacy of the undistributed middle, which is the fallacy where the word may be the same between the first premise and the second premise, however, the concept is not the same. The concept is not linked together. So in the case of student wearing backpack, backpack falls under the concept of student. Can you clarify your question? Okay, I'll explain. So backpack, wearing backpack falls under the genus of student. So if student, then backpack, right? So I want you to draw a circle and in your head, and in that circle is the circle of student. And under that circle is a concept of backpack, right? So remember how I was saying earlier, if you say something about a vertebrate, it doesn't necessarily apply to an invertebrate, right? So I have two concepts. I have student and I have grandpa. So grandpa and student are two discrete concepts. They have a similarity, but the similarity is not conceptually linked. And let me explain how. So the student wearing a backpack falls under the concept of student. However, if my grandpa's wearing a backpack falls under the concept of grandpa. However, the concept of student and grandpa don't necessarily meet. So if I said all cats are black, some black things are TVs, therefore some cats are TVs, that doesn't make any sense because the concept of black, it's logic, right? But even though the word is the same, it's not the same concept that it's being referred to. So, because in the case of cats and TVs, all right, you can think that, but the concept of cats and TVs are not. Yeah, it's fine. Don't worry. We're not using any math today. But all right, good night. Khudafis. But yeah, so the concept of black as it relates to cats and the concept of black as it relates to TVs are two discrete things. They don't have any overlap. They don't have any similarity. And they are in a different species within that genus. So with that being said, species. So with that being said, let's just go over quickly what we went over today, because today was a short lesson. Next week, inshallah, we will go over the idea of logical fallacies, and we're gonna discuss how these logical fallacies relate to the general concepts of logic that we've learned. Now, syllogisms. Oh, sorry. I forgot to go over one more thing. The important part about syllogisms are three words: all, some, and none. So if I say all A is B, all B is C, therefore all A is C, that's a valid statement. However, if I were to say some A is B, all B is C, therefore all A is C, that's an invalid statement. The reason for this is because of that sort of Venn diagram relationship that I was talking about in the first or second class, in which concepts overlap, but they don't necessarily coincide or are founded within each other. If I say all A is C, that's wrong, because what I'm doing is I'm taking the isolated case and I'm generalizing it to all of it, for which it may not be true. So if I were to say all things that are green, so if I were to say plants are green, grass is green, and grass is green, leaves are green, therefore all green things are plants. That would be wrong, right? Because the case of a green blanket would disprove the general case of all things being green being plants. So now, given the idea of all, some, or none, we should be able to construct syllogisms that are very precise. So if I were to say some A is B, all B is C, I can only say some A is C. I cannot say that all A is C. Now, this is pretty common sense, and as I said in the first class, Most of logic is going to be stuff that you already know, stuff that's common sense. Now, that being said, let me just quickly go over what I went over today. So today, the general idea that we went over was the concept of propositions. So this whole unit was about propositions, and the propositions was the second half of logic. So the first half of logic was apprehension. The second half of logic is affirmation. Propositions are statements of affirmation, just as how definitions are statements of apprehension. Now, from propositions, we can get to certain propositions and uncertain propositions. Uncertain propositions are propositions which require proof. And in order to prove these propositions, we use the syllogism. And the syllogism is just a formal way of expressing proof. We don't necessarily need the syllogism, but rather the syllogism is a way of expressing what's going on in our head as a mental exercise. And with that, inshallah, I think we should be able to wrap up today's lesson. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I will post tonight's lecture on the recording. Thank you.